Welcome to today's Steadyhand Cafe, addressing a topic that's not just relevant, but crucial for all of us. And that's protecting our and our family's finances from the ever-evolving landscape of frauds and scams. Now, why did we choose this topic and why now? You're going to hear a lot from our guests today, but a National Post article earlier this fall reported that close to 50% of Canadians say they've been targeted by a scamming attempt in just the past year alone. Many people complain that they're getting targeted online by nefarious emails, websites, and social media posts in a practice that's known as phishing. Well, vishing, or scam phone calls, are designed to trick people into revealing sensitive information, and they're also a big problem, with over 43% of Canadians saying that they've been targeted by phone calls in the last 3 months. Just think about all those CRA calls that implore you to press 1 for English or 2 for Chinese. And fraudsters aren't letting an unanswered phone call stop them from deploying other schemes. Text messaging schemes, or what's called smishing, are prevalent today too, with 41% of Canadians saying that they've gotten such texts in, again, just the last 3 months. Now, on the brighter side, it appears that many Canadians are actually not falling for these fraud attempts. TransUnion, a credit bureau service, has reported that only 6% of Canadians targeted by fraudsters have actually been tricked into revealing sensitive information. So all this phishing, vishing, and smishing is enough to turn people off from picking up their phones at all. And as the Post article goes on to explain, in the United States, such scam calls are so prevalent that 7 out of 10 people say they've simply stopped answering their phones for fear of being tricked. And in researching this topic for today and updating the operating system of my iPhone yesterday, I actually invoked the call blocking feature to weed out all of those irritating CRA calls that I get. Well, next up, my dad. And as an adult child, many of us play a key role in the financial well-being of our older family members. Our parents may not be as familiar or cognizant with the complexities of online transactions or the various scams that can target them. And to our older participants watching today, as I noted, you are unfortunately the prevailing target of scams. It's crucial to recognize these potential threats and to take proactive measures to prevent falling victim to frauds and scams. Now, to help us in this effort, we're super fortunate to have 2 great subject matter experts join us today. And I'd love to welcome to the webinar Rob Paddick, the Deputy Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments, and Graham Webb, the Executive Director of ACE, the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly. Rob and Graham bring a wealth of knowledge to help us address these challenges. Rob, Graham, welcome. It's really great to have you join us. Now, Graham's going to kick us off today with some remarks from his experience supporting seniors in the community. Then we'll hear from Rob. And finally, we'll open up to questions from you, our audience. So please take a moment throughout the webinar to drop your questions into the question box. And if we can't get to your question today, we'll be sure to follow up with you by email. And while you look around this new On24 webinar platform, this is the first time that we've used it, we've included several resources that you can safely download. You'll see the bulk of those resources are on the left side of your screen. And we've also included a link to the monthly updated Steadyhand Investment Outlook. Okay, before Graham takes the main stage, let's start with our first audience poll. So this is a chance to hear from you, our audience, and that first poll question is, have you been targeted by a fraud or a scam? And I'm inclined to extend that to say, not only have you been targeted, but has anybody that lives with you been targeted by a fraud or a scam? And to give you an idea of what that might look like, referring back to that email phishing, here's an example of an email that I received at my Steadyhand email account just last week. Now, we employ very sophisticated email phishing filters, but this one and several others tend to get through. So we need to remain vigilant before falling for these sorts of things. So that's an example of what we might see as a fraud or scam attempt. Well, let's have a look and see how the results. Whoa, okay. I'm seeing 90% of you have or know somebody in your immediate family that has been the target of a fraud or scam, which is probably representative of why so many people have actually signed up for this webinar today. So I think, Graham, with that, that's a good setup to hear from you and the work that you guys are doing at ACE. And Rob, you and I'll come back shortly.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, David, for inviting me to speak to everyone here today about frauds or scams. I am the Executive Director of the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly. We're a legal aid clinic serving low income seniors. We've been in operation since 1984. I've been with ACE for 28 years, 21 years as a staff litigation lawyer, dealing day out, day in, day out with seniors issues, elder law issues, and the last 7 as the executive director. We get over 4,000 calls per year, and many of our calls do deal with financial elder abuse, including many instances of frauds and scams. um, as David has mentioned, there is widespread scamming. Half of us, at least, are targeted, and these scams are really widely underreported. Now, the scams can be carried out in person, they can be by phone, they can be by mail, they can be increasingly online or through social media resources. Just looking at some of the numbers, it looks like the reported numbers are a little bit down for 2023 over 2022. This is from the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, the frauds and scams that have been reported to them. So just within the first 6 months of this year, they have received 32,000 reports as compared to 92,000 for the full year last year, from 21,000 victims, reporting $283 million worth of scams as opposed to $531 million last year. It looks like the dollar amount is up on a per person basis. That's a lot of money. One type of fraud and scam that we continue to see and is causing us a lot of work at the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly and causing a lot of problems for our clients are door-to-door scams, including home renovation and mortgage fraud scams. This is very widespread. So what may happen is door-to-door salesmen go throughout neighborhoods, um, offering to install services, equipment, home renovations, often seeking payment up front. They may not provide the services provided. Even if they do provide the services, they may be of low quality or very little value, and the service provider might, without your knowledge, register a notice of security interest under the Personal Property Security Act against title to your home. And these things are not all that easy to come off. We also see people going around offering to help people get rid of the NOSIs, as we call them, notices of security interest, with an upfront fee. Uh, this can land people in a lot of problems. It usually results in uh, mortgage loans to get rid of the registrations. And we have many clients who have been defrauded by this and are at risk of losing their home. In fact, we're working daily with the police and other authorities to prosecute these claims. Another type of scam that we see is the romance scam. This is just one version of something that we think of as an emergency scam, where someone online usually establishes some type of relationship with you and then invents an emergency causing you to send money to them. The romance scam, they would usually cultivate a relationship with you online, expressing terms of endearment, saying things like they love you, and which hopefully they're expecting you will believe. And people enter into these online relationships when suddenly one of two things might happen. One is that your online friend wants to come meet you, but needs money to travel, which of course doesn't happen, or your online friend gives you something to part with your money, such as a family emergency. They've had a loved one end up in hospital, or they themselves end up in hospital and they need money for expenses, which the victim sends. You think these things can't apply to you, but they do. Another form of these scams is the This is another emergency scam. It's the grandparent scam, usually over the telephone. And this has been going on for decades, where someone calls up, just calling random adults through the phone book. Grandma, it's your favorite grandson. And the woman might answer, "Oh, is that you, Jack? Yeah, it's me, Jack. My car's broken down. I need already some money, Grandma. Can you wire this to me through Western Union?" Or alternatively, we're hearing of people calling on behalf of the grandchild, a police officer, a a lawyer, someone impersonating those people, saying that your grandson, usually the grandson, not usually the granddaughter, is in a lot of trouble and he needs money to get out of jail or for some other purpose, which you would either send by wire service, they would pick up by in cash by courier from your home, or by Uber. Think it can't happen to you? I don't know. I would we there's lots of videos online. This particular video is a global television report, an interview of an actual man who fell for this scam not once but twice. We're not able to play it over the media today, but it's in the resource box, and there's many similar videos. What's interesting about this particular gentleman is that he fell for the grandparent scam twice, but he actually doesn't have a grandchild. When the purported police officer called, they were calling about his grandson, and he said, nephew? And they said, yeah, nephew, who needed $10,000 to get out of jail. And then there was another call back for another $15,000, and he paid it twice, where they would send someone by his door to pick up the cash, always cash. And the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre reports that in 2021, $2.4 million were lost by their estimation due to the grandparent scam. And in 2022, it went up to $9.2 million. And by the way, we understand that the Niagara Regional Police has notified all the banks in their region of this scam because it is so prevalent throughout Southern Ontario. And we've even had media inquiries from Montreal, Quebec, and British Columbia about the same grandparent scam. It's very widespread. Be aware of voice cloning. This is very insidious. There is now technology that can clone your voice to say anything that the program is programmed to say. They would provide a script after recording as little as 10 words over the telephone. So the scammer will engage you in a conversation, recording your voice, and your voice is now like a signature. Sometimes when you deal with the bank over the telephone, the bank will say, we'd like permission to clone to record your voice to identify you. A scammer using voice cloning applications can use your voice as your signature to gain access to your bank accounts and other financial institutions if you allow them to do so. It can also get you into a lot of problems. So if you're on the telephone and you don't know who you're speaking with, then don't talk. Don't entertain the scammer. Terminate the call. And if you want to speak to your bank or the police or your business contacts or anyone who's purporting to call you, then you call them yourself. And above all else, just don't give any information about yourself, your household, or your finances over the telephone unless you're the one placing the call. Now, just making sure that you're the one placing the call is not enough protection, because you have to make sure you're calling the right number. And this is a slide I've borrowed from the Canada Revenue Agency, cautioning Canadian taxpayers about caller ID spoofing, where don't rely on your caller ID on your phone. It may not be the correct phone number. You might have someone calling from India who's showing a 613 area code. And so you cannot rely on the number given to you. Even if the number given to you is a real number, it might not be the actual bank. It might be the number for someone who's impersonating your bank. So make sure you're relying on your own information as to whom you call, and make sure you know whom you're speaking with. As we've said, don't give out personal information. That would include even your name. Don't give out your name over the telephone. Your address, your birth date, your social insurance number. Absolutely do not give any credit card or banking or financial information. And if you didn't place the call, don't give out the information. Don't be afraid to say no. Often on the phone, there will be high pressure sales tactics. It's quite permissible simply to hang up the call or to tell the caller you're not interested if you wish to be polite. But with voice cloning technology, I recommend against engaging in conversation with callers who you aren't able to identify. Do report the incident. There is a Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre in North Bay, Ontario. They have a telephone number on the screen and a website address. If you don't report the fraud, they won't know about it. It relies on you to report. If you have had a identity issue, then call your bank or financial institutions. Also notify Equifax and TransUnion, the credit reporting agencies, and do contact the police. Now, don't expect the police are going to investigate many of these claims, but they may have a spate of them, and without you telling them, they don't know what's happening. Those are my comments to begin with, Rob, David, and back to you.
Graham, thank you. I think you had one more slide. Steps to this is you, Graham, right?
This is a good resource. This is an online website operated through Legal Aid Ontario. Steps to Justice gives consumer legal information in plain language that everyone can understand. And it also has some guided pathways as to how to do certain types of things, for instance, a will or a power of attorney.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. You just left again. That's fine. Well, let's can't wait to hear from our Deputy Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments. But first, we have our second of two polls. So we'll run that poll now. This one's a little different. This actually is, have you or someone you know been impacted by a fraud or scam? So this is not whether you've been there's been an attempted scam, but have you actually been impacted by a fraud or scam? And I'm going to share a little personal example of how I was. Here's another email that I received through the Steadyhand email address. Again, we have very powerful filters, but there's a lot of stuff that still gets through. This one looks pretty impressive, looking to tell me whether I want to keep my password, etc. Periodically, I shouldn't say every year, but periodically we are trained in cybersecurity issues, and we are trained to be aware for these kinds of phishing attempts. But I have to tell you, after a recent training exercise, I actually clicked on an email, on a thing in an email that I should not have clicked on. It came from the firm that did our training, so we actually hired them to try to sort of hack into us a little bit. And the reason I clicked on it is because I was distracted. I was doing something else while I was sort of blasting through my emails, and I really wasn't paying attention. And I just think about the analogy of distracted driving and texting, all the rest of it. And I think it's a very real analogy to how we should be treating our digital presence. We should be totally focused on what we're doing in the moment, not trying to watch a webinar on the one hand, on the one screen, and doing your emails on the other screen. So let's have a look at the results. Okay, 60% have been impacted, or you know someone that's been impacted. That's quite discouraging, but I guess that's probably a really good setup, Rob, to hear from you.
Thank you very much, David, and good afternoon, everyone. As David mentioned, I'm Rob Paddick, and I'm one of the deputy ombudsmen at the Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments, otherwise known as OBSI. Just like to thank David for the opportunity to speak with you today about the different types of frauds and scams that we see and some of the things that you can do to protect yourself. I agree with so many of the things that Graham said, and so many of the tips. And so there's going to be a little bit of a repeat, but I think some of the things are worth repeating and hearing again. But before I do that, I just want to just spend a couple of minutes talking to you about a little bit about OBSI. So OBSI is a national independent, not-for-profit dispute resolution service where consumers can bring their complaints if they have not been able to resolve them directly with their financial services firm. So we have about 1,500 participating financial services firms, including almost all investment firms and banks across the country, and many credit unions. In 2023, we responded to over 16,000 consumer inquiries and opened over 3,000 cases, which was a record for us. In addition to resolving individual disputes, we share the knowledge we gain through our investigations with consumers, participating firms, regulators, and the public. You know, our vision is to help ensure a fair, effective, and trusted Canadian financial services sector. Feeding data and insights back into the system can support a cycle of continuous improvement. So those are some of the things we do. And finally, we can recommend up to $350,000. So in the past few years, we've seen a significant increase in the number of scam and fraud complaints in both the banking sector and investment sector. Consumers will typically complain that their bank or their investment firm should have protected them from being scammed. So last year, of the 3,000 complaints cases that we opened, over 1,000 were fraud and scam complaints, so over a third. And so you can see here from this first chart that last year, fraud and scam complaints made up 40% of the total banking complaints that we opened. And you'll notice that percentage has doubled over the last couple of years. In the second chart, you can see that scam and fraud complaints are also on the rise in the investment sector. So fraud and scam complaints made up about 16% of the investment cases that we opened. I'll talk about investment fraud complaints more in a minute, but almost all of them involve cryptocurrency dealers. So we see a wide variety of fraud and scam complaints, and there's tons of variations of each. So here's a list of some of the most common complaints that we see. The list isn't a complete one. You know, I noticed after I finished my presentation that I hadn't included gift card scams on the list. And so, you know, the list goes on, and the types of scams are always evolving as fraudsters are constantly inventing new ways to try to take our money. So, you know, unfortunately for consumers, we are not able to recommend compensation in many of the scam and fraud complaints that get to our office. Why? Our focus is determining whether the bank did something wrong. If they did, we will recommend compensation. However, unfortunately, in many cases, the consumer has knowingly participated in the scam or unwittingly participated in the fraud, often giving the fraudster, you know, their personal and banking information. And in the bank, in a lot of those situations, the bank couldn't have prevented the consumer's losses. So this is why I wanted to provide you today with some information on how you can protect yourself. So just quickly before I do that, though, I just want to give you a sense of what these scams and frauds look like. And both David and Graham have done a great job of describing some of the scams out there. One of the most common scams or frauds that we see are e-transfer frauds. So how does this work? So as David was mentioning, the fraudster will send you a text message that appears to be from a legitimate company or organization. Maybe a store that you use, often CRA, and the wording of the text prompts you to click on a link in the text. So it'll often say something like, you're entitled to a refund. Once you click on that link, you're brought to a screen to first choose the icon of your bank, and then enter your bank account number and password to receive the refund. Of course, it's a fake website. Once you enter your bank account number and password, the fraudster has your information to e-transfer your money out of your account. So, as you know, both Graham and David have said, please don't click on links in text, especially if that text is unexpected. So if we have time later, I can go over other scenarios, but just quickly, another common example is the fraudster, instead of just sending you the text directly, will call you. They pretend they're from your bank, or maybe Amazon or another similar company, and they'll say there's a problem with your account, and they're calling you to help you fix it. So then they send you the text, get you to click on the link to enter your banking information so they can start to resolve the issue. Again, once you've given the banking information over, the fraudsters have it to be able to do transactions and withdrawals from your account. So that's the e-transfer fraud. So cryptocurrency scams. So how do those work? So I'm going to tell you about a case that we investigated. I think that's the best way to describe it. So Ms. P was a senior with retirement savings. Unexpectedly, Ms. P received a phone call from a fraudster pretending that he was from an investment firm. The fraudster encouraged her to invest in cryptocurrency and promised her high returns, to a big red flag. But Ms. P had heard that about people making money in crypto and thought this would be a great opportunity. And you know what? She could really use the money. The fraudster, who was pretending to be an investment firm, told Ms. P to open an account at a cryptocurrency dealer, purchase Bitcoin, and then send him the Bitcoin to invest, and he'd make her lots of money. So Ms. P transferred the money from her bank to the cryptocurrency dealer. And when she did that, the bank asked her if she knew the person she was sending the money to and warned her it could be a scam. Ms. P told the bank that she knew someone at the firm, and that she would invest her money the way she wanted. So Ms. P transferred the money to the crypto dealer, converted it to Bitcoin, and sent the Bitcoin to the fraudster. The fraudster then starts sending her charts and statements saying, oh, look at all the great returns that you're getting. And the fraudster recommended that she invest even more, and unfortunately she did. Again, the bank warned Ms. P that it might be a scam, but she ignored the warning, transferred more money, bought more Bitcoin, and transferred it to the fraudsters. So, one day Ms. P decided she wanted to enjoy some of her profits. But when she tried to contact the fraudster, he wouldn't send her the money, wouldn't return her calls, and unfortunately, Ms. P had lost $56,000 of her retirement savings. So, really tragic, situation, and unfortunately one that we see a lot. So, how do you protect yourself from fraud? And again, both David and Graham have given a lot of great tips. I think one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that opting out of financial services is just not possible, right? So what we need to do is to learn everything that we can about the system so that we can protect ourselves. This webinar is a great start, but I would, highly recommend that, do as much research and as much learning as you can. So just a few tips. Some of which are on the screen and some which are not, but, and again, it might be a bit of a repeat, but keep your bank account number, password, and personal information confidential. Protect it. If you lose one of your cards, or you disclose your bank account number or password or personal information, or you realize, oh wait, I may have been just scammed, report it to your bank as quickly as possible. Then they can put a hold on your account to prevent further transactions from happening. Again, be really careful about clicking on links and texts. As a best practice, don't do it, especially if you receive the text unexpectedly. And just as Graham was saying, consider not answering a call if you don't know the number. If it's important, the person will leave a voicemail message, and you'll have then time to decide, whether you want to respond and how to respond. If you do answer the call, completely agree, you can, and say the person's calling from your bank and pretending to call from your bank or CRA, you can hang up. Look up the actual number for CRA or the actual number for your bank, and then call them and ask them if they're trying to contact you. Never worry about being rude about hanging up the phone. Another tip, just to go along with the story of Ms. P, listen to your bank if you are withdrawing money or transferring money and they warn you it could be a scam. They've seen a lot of these scenarios before. Tell them the truth about what is happening, and they'll be able to help you. Another one is to enable two-factor authentication on your account. Maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later, but when you do that, you'll receive a text when there's a withdrawal from your account asking you to approve the withdrawal. So if you didn't request the withdrawal, you'll know that something's wrong. And again, never send money or cryptocurrency to strangers or to someone you haven't met in real life. And I've just provided the contact information for us on the screen. If you had any questions about any of this, or if you are wondering whether or not you should be launching a complaint, please don't hesitate to contact us. We'll try everything we can to point you in the right direction. And there's some great information on our website. There's also lots of other websites. There's the Provincial Securities Commissions have some great information on their website. In particular, I'm the most familiar probably with the Ontario Securities Commission's website, getsmarteraboutmoney.ca. It's absolutely a fantastic resource for all kinds of information. Okay, so thank you.
Rob, thank you. I can only imagine the conversations that you have with people who present as saying, look, the bank should have protected me from this fraud or scam. And then you go through what happened and you have to tell them that they unwittingly participated in that. I mean, I can't imagine how difficult those conversations must be. So hence the absolute need for this kind of awareness and engagement and prevention.
Absolutely. It's very tragic, and it's very difficult to hear the stories and knowing that the consumer is not going to be getting their money back.
Well, on that point, Graham, you have advocated for, you've probably represented in a legal situation, older Canadians. Tell us a success story. Tell us about how you actually were able to, put a scammer in the slammer and get some money back for somebody that was scammed or defrauded. And I hope you don't have to think too hard about that.
Well, actually, David, with respect to online scams, it's very rare that you do get money back, because more often than not, it's really untraceable.
Right.
But I can tell you that in instances of elder financial abuse, where, for instance, there's been power of attorney abuse, we've been able to bring legal action against the person acting as the attorney for property, concurrently with police complaints that result in criminal prosecutions, jail sentences, and restitution. So when you're dealing with a person in person, it's much easier to get restitution because there's actually someone to go after. And, if you're, I really was attentive to Rob's comment of don't send money to someone you haven't met in person, because the person you think you're sending money to probably doesn't exist. And, you know, there's no civil proceeding that can get your money back from, you know, a fictitious identity. And so it's hard on the online scams or romance scams and so on. I can say, though, that one person we dealt with, who was a 68-year-old lawyer who's very financially savvy, has a great deal of savings and so on, was presented with an investment opportunity, and she went to her bank to draw funds. And when she went to the bank, she was cautioned. The bank said to her, "Are you sure you want to send funds to that account?" And she said, "I think so." And the bank pointed out to her that it was likely a fraudulent account, a scam, and indeed it was. And but for the advice of the bank, this 68-year-old lawyer, investment savvy, might have fallen for the scam and done what was asked of her. We've also, if I can just say one other thing, we have seen the banks intervene. You know, we had one client who had lived in her home in Toronto almost all her life. This was a home in a very good neighborhood. She suffered some medical setbacks, ended up in a retirement home, and she was very isolated. And a gentleman from another country inveigled her way into her life as a home contractor and tried to get access to her bank account. And the bank, on its own initiative, froze the account. And we were able to intervene and refer the matter to the police. So we have had success in intervening,
Right.
and with the cooperation of the banks and the police. But when you send money online, you should never expect to get it back. When it is gone.
Fair enough. And this whole, in the investment world, we now have this trusted contact that is meant to give us, dealing with our clients, where we suspect there's an unusual situation, perhaps some pressure, some fraud, or some other issues in the background. We now have a trusted contact person that we can speak to just to double check what's going on in the background. Rob, on this issue of sort of the banks, insurance companies, and the like institutions, is there anything being done like on a kind of a initiative, like an industry-wide basis, or is it all individual banks just doing what they do from their own perspective?
Yeah, that's a really good question, David. I know that certainly frauds and scams are top of mind for the regulators, so both the banking regulators and the investment regulators. And so there are rules that that apply. And expectations of financial institutions, and financial institutions have taken steps to implement different measures to protect consumers, offering one-time passcodes, two-factor authentication, alerts and warnings on your account when there's a transaction. My practice is to take advantage of as many of those as possible. And I certainly encourage my kids and my family to do the same. I just to go back quickly to Graham's comments, like there are requirements on financial institutions. Financial institutions do have policies and procedures to detect situations where there's suspected fraud and to warn consumers. Just as Graham said, and there are cases where we've recommended compensation. Perhaps the bank hasn't followed their policies and procedures, in particular when it's an in-person transaction. So when the person goes into the bank and has an interaction with the bank representative, but it's the electronic transactions, right? So when the electronic transactions and it's so the bank does not have the opportunity to stop the transaction, and it happens. And as Graham said, once it's gone, you've got to just expect that you're not going to get it back, unfortunately.
Okay.
right? And in the world of cryptocurrency, once you once you transfer cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, it's irreversible, right? So banks do have some ability to recall transactions under certain circumstances, but a transfer of cryptocurrency is irreversible. It's gone.
Yeah. With respect to Mrs. P, I attended the OSC's town hall last night on frauds and scams, and they put up a poll asking all people on the call whether they had, what was the actual question? Have you been presented with a crypto investment opportunity, or have you thought about a crypto investment opportunity? And thankfully, the answer so far is 90% no. So, but unfortunately, to your point, this is probably just the tip of the iceberg. We have a ton of questions, so we're going to start to really move fast here. Just on this topic, though, of the banks, a question from Maria: what do the banks see that causes them to suspect that an account is fraudulent that we as lay people may not see? For example, that investment savvy lawyer example that you presented, Rob.
I think what they will, what they see is, it's not a regular occurrence that really any of us these days go into a branch to make that type of transaction. It is quite unusual, right? So in those circumstances, if the transaction is not typical for a consumer, or looking to withdraw cash, right? So these are kind of red flags for the banks, and so they do have procedures where they will pick up on these red flags, and then they'll ask consumers a number of questions to try to figure out if it's a fraud and try to warn the consumer. As I was saying before, I would really just encourage anyone, if you're in that type of situation, that you tell the bank representative the truth. Tell them what's happening, and then they'll be able to help you. Unfortunately, what happens is that a lot of consumers under those circumstances will lie to the bank. And one of the reasons that they lie is because they've been encouraged by the fraudster to lie, right? So it's all part of it, right? And so that would just be my advice there.
Okay. Graham, I'd love you to pile on, but you can't. We got to keep moving on. Either one of you, there's two questions that are very similar. How do I avoid fraud when using debit cards? And what do you think about the safety and security of putting credit cards onto a Apple Watch or an iPhone?
Debit cards are dangerous, and debit card transactions can't be reversed as easily as a credit card transaction can, because with a credit card, there's an intermediary. The credit card company has a relationship with the credit card holder, and they also have a relationship with a merchant. And if there's something that violates the agreement, then the credit card company can reverse the transaction. With a debit card, the money comes straight out of your account. There's no intermediary to complain to, and debit cards are inadvisable to make large transactions. Credit cards are also, what's really important in frauds is information, and giving information about your credit card is very, very dangerous. You should be very careful how and to whom you disclose that information, because it can be misused.
I've always said, do you really need, well, I didn't say this, but I don't really want to give my 3-digit PIN on my credit card, and I keep getting asked for it. Do I have to give it?
I don't know the answer to that. Do you know the answer, Rob?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, David. I think that you could try not to give it. I don't know, and you may not then be able to buy that particular product through that, store or service. But, you could certainly try.
All right. Well, I'm going to get to the bottom of that.
Rob will know more about this, but certainly giving the PIN on your debit card is against the cardholder agreement and makes you absolutely liable for any transactions using that PIN.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Let's switch to something that's super important. We talked about passwords. We have a great question here. We have over 24 different passwords with different institutions. What's the best way to track and securely store those passwords? What do you guys recommend?
That's a really good question. I think there's there's a number of products out there, and there's not one in particular that I can recommend. I would just do your research and kind of see what works for you. I know there's a lot of password managers and things like that you can use on your computer if that's helpful. I think other people have different systems with respect to kind of how they use their passwords. But the longer the longer the password, and there's a lot of advice out there too with respect to how to construct your password. But the more complex your password, the better.
I am terrified of password managers, although I use one. I have over 250 passwords, and I used to keep them in a file folder in my desk, not recorded anywhere electronically. Too hard to keep up to date. And the password manager password, I do not record anywhere except in a secure file folder in a locked cabinet at home. If anyone were to crack my vault, I would have endless problems, and I do worry about that. I wish I had a better answer.
And while we're on this topic, what do you think about VPNs? We already talked about multi-factor, but we should talk about that again. And then this new thing called RIFD wallets.
Yeah, I think, VPN is essentially a way to encrypt your information as it goes from your computer to another source. Again, that's something that, people would have to research, to decide. The wallets. So essentially, that technology, fraudsters can use that technology, which is like a radio wave type technology, to get information from your credit card. And those wallets contain or propose to contain material to interrupt those radio waves. The effectiveness of them, I can't say, but that's essentially the idea behind them.
Last night,
I would recommend the wallet.
The what?
I would recommend the use of the wallet that prevents the transmission of information, because basically when you scan your credit card against a scanner, it's collecting electronic information, but sometimes it can scan even if you're just walking by. So if you're a woman and you're carrying your credit card in your purse, someone might be able to scan your credit card if they're in near proximity to you.
Right. And just getting back to the iPhone and Apple Pay and the watch and all the rest of it, you see so many people tapping with their phones and stuff like that. We didn't quite get to that. Did you have a perspective on that?
That's not our, certainly my or our area of expertise. Again, what I would recommend to everybody with respect to all of these, possibilities is to do your research, right? Yeah. And at the end of the day, just to echo what, Graham has said, do whatever you can to protect your personal and banking information, right? So that would be my advice there.
They're very popular methods of payment, but in a sense, they're no different than cash in terms of your exposure. Now, if I'm going out on the subway or traveling somewhere or going to the gym, I probably wouldn't want to carry $5,000 worth of cash in my wallet in case someone steals my wallet. And whatever financial accounts you're carrying on your electronic device, you should consider them exposed. So, if you're going to the gym and you feel good because you had maybe $50 of cash in your wallet, someone steals it, that's okay. But you have credit accounts with $25,000 limits, you're actually exposing yourself to like $25,000, not just with the cash that's in your wallet. So what you're carrying on your phone, be prepared to lose.
Interesting. What do you think about these burner credit cards for online purchases?
You know, I guess it is, you know, it is a way to kind of, if something were to happen, to kind of limit your losses, right? And so that's certainly, so there's that protection.
And I call them burner because I think of them like a burner phone from one of those movies, those spy movies. But a credit card would be a credit card that you have a very modest limit on, maybe $1,500 or $2,000. And that's the card, the only card that you use for your Amazon and your other online Canadian Tire purchases, etc.
I think that's a good idea. But even more importantly is also to regularly read your statements. You know, because with the credit cards, if you aren't reading your statements, you lose your ability to challenge transactions. And I know we're running out of time, but, you know, I've long held the view that I don't give information about myself over the telephone unless I place the call. And financial institutions don't usually just call you up, you know. One Sunday evening, I received a call on my home phone purporting to be from my bank. I thought it was a fraud, and I just hung up. And a few days later, I looked at my credit card statement online, and I found there were 2 unauthorized transactions for about $50 and $250. So I called the bank, and they had indeed called me, and they had reversed those. You know, they had no problem reversing those 2 transactions, but there were also other transactions for larger amounts that they held, like the first one for $50 and $250 they let go through, but the ones for $2,500 and $4,000 they stopped. And, you know, I had to reissue my credit card. It was a whole big problem because I had pre-authorized payments on my cards and so on. But, you know, if the bank calls you and you hang up on them and you look at your statement and you call them back, you can challenge unauthorized transactions. Okay. And having a low limit on the card you use online is a good idea.
I guess a good poll question would be, I'm not sure we'd all answer it very honestly, how often do we even review our bank and or credit card statements? But we won't go there. We've had a comment from the audience. They bought an RFID wallet. Several credit cards lost their tap function. They ditched the wallet and replaced their credit card so they could tap again. So there's a little bit of background research. We're sending money to each other a lot electronically using the e-transfer feature of our banks. And when I send money to somebody and they've enabled auto deposit, I kind of go, well, I'm not sure I really trust that. Like, I don't think I should do that. But I've recently heard, no, actually, you should do that. Can either of you speak to that functionality?
I'm sorry, that's outside my expertise.
Yeah, I can speak to that, David. I think there's, that is a recommended, some have recommended that practice. And the reason being is the money will be deposited right away. And there is less chance that that transaction can be interrupted and diverted to a fraudster.
Yeah. Right. We've also had a question. I think it's a really great question. A lot of elderly people, they're at home, they're getting these phone calls. Is there a resource, like I almost think of a fridge magnet or some sort of, quick fact sheet that you can paste to your refrigerator or your cabinet or whatever, so that if you're thinking, this is kind of like a good tip sheet on how to address it. And one of the experiences that my wife and I had was we got a phone call from the credit card company saying that they suspected some fraudulent things were happening and and eventually my wife just said, you know what, you should speak to my husband, and she gave me the phone. And I asked the person alleged to work at CIBC, so I said, well, what tower do you work in? And they said Commerce Court West. And I said, well, that's legitimate. And I said, when you come to work in the morning, what subway stop do you get off at? And they hung up. And I wasn't trying to be smart. I was just trying to, really verify the identity of this person. And I just think most people probably wouldn't in that circumstance have the right questions to ask. So are you guys aware of any good resources to that?
I'm not, and I should be. But the problem is that things are changing so fast, it's really hard to keep up.
Yeah.
And, 5 years ago, I would have answered a question about how to stop telephone fraud. There's one question I would always ask the call. I'd say, who are you calling for? And they could never tell me,
Great one.
because they're calling a number. How do they know who they're looking for? But today, I would never recommend someone to do that because of voice cloning. Once I learned of voice cloning, my better advice is just to shut up on the phone unless you know who you're talking to, because even the sound of your voice is identifying information that can cause you problems. It's a very strange world, and things are rapidly changing. And David, what you're suggesting is a really useful educational suggestion.
Here's a big one. Is identity theft insurance worth it? Maybe someone could just talk a little bit about identity theft insurance and when you might consider getting it, if you could speak to that.
I don't, Graham, do you have a lot of experience with identity theft insurance?
I have no experience with identity theft insurance, but I do have experience with title insurance on real property. And there is a product called existing owner title insurance, which we do recommend. So normally if you're purchasing a home or you're placing a mortgage, that your lawyer may arrange a title insurance policy, which does help our clients in cases of mortgage fraud. The situation of many older adult homeowners is that they've owned their house for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, bought it at a time when title insurance was not available, and haven't had any transactions since. And these people who are long-standing homeowners with mortgage-free homes are at risk of identity fraud in the sense of title fraud. And so for persons who have owned their home for a long time, I would recommend existing owner title insurance through any of the major carriers.
Thank you. I don't imagine you have a perspective on this, but if you do, it'd be interesting. Question is, am I better off using like Apple products or Microsoft / IBM products? Like, is one better than the other at helping with this issue?
Yeah, it's a great question, but I don't have a view, but I know that it's a question that's often asked. Yeah.
I think you should assume that no matter what technology you're using, there will be a level of insecurity to it. And so, as they used to say about cars, the biggest problem with a car is the nut behind the wheel, and the biggest problem with fraud and scams is the information we give out. Like on these telephone scams, the scammer knows nothing. The victim provides the information. And with the online scam, the victim of the scam provides the information. And on the door-to-door scams, the victim of the scam provides the information. The information is gold, and it comes from you. And so be very guarded about your information. And I really endorse what Rob said earlier about don't send money to people you've never met in person. When we're looking for signs of fraud, I'm looking for, a business that has no physical office. They can't be traced, that has no written materials, that has no accreditation from a third-party accrediting agency. And most importantly, you have no in-person meetings, someone you've never met in person. Why would you send tens of thousands of dollars on any kind of investment to someone you've never met in person? You don't even know who they are.
Because they're very convincing. Before you guys give some positive message to end this 1-hour webinar, I don't remember, Graham, did you talk about the recovery room scam?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, David. What scam?
Did you reference the recovery room scam? No,
I haven't. I'm sorry.
Are you either of you seeing that on the rise, and is it worthwhile just taking 40 seconds to talk about it?
Yeah, I think it's well worth it, David. So essentially, a recovery room scam, it's like the consumer gets scammed twice. So the consumer gets scammed in the first place, right? And so, and it gives out their and you know, money is taken from them. And then what happens is the first scammer sells the consumer's information, contact information, to a second scammer. The second scammer then calls that consumer and says, for a fee, I'll help you get your money back, right? The consumer pays the second scammer, and they never hear from the second scammer again. So it's a real issue.
Well, that's not a great way to end the webinar, because that is really, that's piling on. That's unfortunate, but I don't know whether this is. I just got a text message on my watch from somebody watching saying that they're laughing because as they listen to the webinar, they just got a scam call. I don't know if that's a funny way to end the webinar, but that's probably a sign of the times. On behalf of the audience, Rob and Graham, thank you for your preparation today and for your comments. Really, really powerful statements about, you know, unwittingly participating. That's what's really going to stick with me. We can't be unwittingly participating. There are things that we can and must be doing. And we have those resources that are on the left side of your On24 platform page there. So we encourage you to download those. And again, sorry we didn't get to all the questions. We will follow up with you by email. And if there are any, and maybe what we'll do is if there's anything else that comes out of some other thoughts from Rob or Graham, we'll communicate those to everybody that participated today as well. Many of us are old enough to remember that fantastic 1980s show that I used to come home and couldn't wait to turn on, Hill Street Blues. And you remember Sergeant Phil, before he released the New York patrol to their streets, would always say, and remember, let's be careful out there. So I thought that was a poignant way to finish today's webinar. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Bye for now.
Thank you.